Hello, my name's Niranjan, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast. Learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 13, where we will be talking to Sara Ness and learn how she developed the mastery of connection as her craft. Sara is an instigator of authenticity, ninja of connection, and awkward turtle of social situations. She has worked with thousands of leaders and groups across the world, from educators to executives, to explore our creative potential through better relating. Sara is the founder and chief catalyst at Authentic Revolution, a consulting and training company for connections and leadership skills. In her time off and on, she is involved in Austin's acroyoga, dance, and staying indoors to read scenes. So hello and welcome to Sara. Sara, how are you today?
I am sleepy, but really happy to finally be here with you.
I'm so grateful for you to be able to take time out of your busy day schedule and life, because I know you have so much on the go in supporting and empowering so many different people on their life path and journey, and giving them various different perspectives of how they want to look at and envision their life, right? Have I kind of positioned that right?
I'm glad it lands that way. I think these days it feels like there's an altruistic motive of like, oh yeah, I want to help the world and I want to help, whoever I come in contact with. And then there's also kind of become an artistic motive of, okay, I don't know what impact things are going to have and I can't help everybody. So like, what kind of art do I want to create? And my personal form of art tends to be with humans.
Interesting perspective. It really is an interesting perspective how you've kind of broken it down. With that in mind, has that defined you in who you are with your mission and vision and how you strive to be? Do you feel like that has defined who Sara is?
That kind of orientation?
Yeah.
I think I used to be defined by the desire for service, like the desire to help. My personal mission used to be trying to reduce suffering in any way I could. I've really been trying to come to terms, especially during quarantine and COVID, and understanding more about just the reality of poverty and suffering in the world. And also hearing a lot of my friends tell me stories about their own trauma and realizing that like suffering is not always a preventable or even a bad thing. And so I've been trying to kind of disentangle myself from that being my only mission, because it was driving me a little bit crazy to not be able to help everyone. I was just like, I can't rest. I can't I have to be trying to help, but I also know that so many things have network effects. Like you never know. It's kind of like the butterfly in the cocoon. If you help the butterfly out, it can die. My mom was an epidemiologist, a public health researcher for her whole career. And, one of the top figures in the field. And then she realized that public health research has extended the human lifespan, something like an average of 30 years in the last 100. And then the side effects of that are that we have a really overwhelmed healthcare system and people are living longer than ever, but not necessarily healthier. We don't have society set up for it. So kind of all of that in the last couple years has been leading me to try to understand what other motivations there can be other than reducing suffering for my life. And I also deal with like pretty bad depression. So it's like, for me, if I let myself sink into it, it has very intense consequences. So I think, yeah, the way that I've dealt with it is like something you said before we started, of trusting more of, I guess, flow and intuition, or more of what feels good and what I find myself naturally drawn towards, balancing my desire to help with the sense of what I naturally like doing and creating. I love making things. I love writing courses. I love teaching for my own benefit as well as for others.
Do you feel that that is a calling that you have for your purpose, your life, or who you are?
I don't know if I have a specific life calling or purpose. I don't know that I've ever felt a really strong, like, this is what I'm here to do. But I do feel a sense of what brings me enjoyment and what seems to land best for others and what seems to serve the people in my life. So there's almost a sense more of triangulating in each moment and each day. What is the best thing to do, given who I am and given what's needed and given the people around me? And there are definitely like shorter term missions. Like right now I'm loving in my company, I'd say one of my main missions is trying to create an ecosystem where anybody can find community and skills in communication and can find places to basically call home with groups of other people. And so I've been really driven to create an ecosystem that can serve that. Leadership trainings that create really good groups and online platforms where people can come to connect. I guess I don't call that my life's mission, because I think if for some reason it ended today, if someone were to say, all right, you're never allowed to do things in the realm of community or authentic relating again, I think I'd find something else at this intersection of creation and service and be able to find a lot of joy in it.
From what I've learned from you in how you have created this space, having the definitive answer of what a calling is, I think that can morph and that can change and it can evolve just as we do as humans, right? It's an evolutionary piece. Mm-hmm. And yes, maybe your calling at the beginning was to save those who are in pain, so to speak. But now it's more of creating a safe space for them to land.
That feels true. I'd say it does feel like I have a calling for now, which is something these days like, I think there's maybe 3 parts to it. One is finding the best way for myself to be in the world that both contributes and makes me happy. Second is creating spaces for others to feel safe and at home and able to grow. And the last, especially during COVID, is just making sure the people that are closest to me are okay, alive and happy and supported and loved, my physical and my blood and my friend family, mm-hmm. which has kind of become a job in itself.
Absolutely, mm-hmm. Right. These times have definitely challenged us to go beyond not only ourselves, but to go beyond for others too. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think an interesting aspect of it has been my family and my friends used to have some difficulties, but used to be fairly self-sufficient. And so I was focusing a lot on the world. And then I think one of the things quarantine and COVID have done is, in a way, they're a great equalizer. Like everyone is going through some form of trauma and upset. And so I'm finding myself spending a lot more time like focusing at home, but it's also, especially with my biological family, it's actually brought us a lot closer to have that sort of interdependence.
But in the same token, the quarantine aspect of it has also created the complete opposite of what your intentions are with authentic relating, because it is so communal, it is so connecting in physical spaces, typically, from what I understand. It's creating that space, having that interaction, that dialogue, but now transferring everything online adds a whole different dimension to connection.
Yeah. So I've been traveling for about a month now and, talking to people in places that I pass through and talking to friends in Austin and community leaders. And the majority of people I talk with have actually seemed to do better in quarantine than outside of it. People have kind of found their inner pods and started doing creative work and explored themselves. And there's some way that despite a lot of extended community not being possible, it seems like a lot of people have centered in on what their inner community is and tightened those bonds. For people that do well on the internet, there is still a lot of community happening. A lot of even the authentic relating groups put their events online. We've had a platform, Connect, that's done events every day for the last 5 or 6 years. So I think especially for like extroverts, like I am, I did rely a lot on extended community and just bumping into and seeing my friends. It's required a different orientation to community, where if I want to see people, I really have to extend, and I have to be okay with the kind of the constraints on it, of seeing people at 6 foot distance and deciding, like, kind of balancing the needs of people in my life around level of quarantine. In a way, it's made community harder, but in another way, it's just like deepened and enriched the conversation, even around things like consent. Like, how do you have conversations around what people's quarantine level is? Those are conversations that already came up all the time in different ways, of like, when do you want to hang out? How do you want to be touched? What's the form of our relationship? And now it's like, it's forced a clarification of how do we talk about our needs?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's still a very mental process, and I want to commend all those who are able to expel that from a physical form, because I understand even in your practice, there's a very physical element too when you guys connect on those levels.
It's definitely a loss. Yeah, I wish. If I had a choice, it would be otherwise.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, it's a very different perspective, that's for sure. That's for sure. So, Sara, you have honed many attributes, skills, talents, and gifts that you've crafted into your business. What do you feel are some of those key gifts and key crafts that you have harnessed to be able to come into who you really are and serve others?
I think I had some natural predispositions that were helpful. I've always loved writing. I planned to be a writer when I grew up, and I find it a lot easier than most people. It's a flow state for me. So sitting down and writing 20 or 30 pages is fun. I also have a lot of energy and like kind of a natural entrepreneurship, like a curiosity and a joy of learning things and making things. So I think I kind of got lucky to be cut out for a lot of what I was doing. I learned a lot about communication, but mostly because it wasn't a natural space for me. It was kind of a whole segment of life that I missed growing up. I chose to largely isolate myself and read most of my childhood. And what I mean by that is, like, I would take out 10 or 15 books every week, and that was all I did. Like, I wouldn't interact with people. I was just, I lived in fantasy worlds. I wrote and I read. Communication, when I found authentic relating and when I started kind of studying psychology and sociology, I just became fascinated by, well, how do people communicate and interact? I think now I've become quite good at communication skills and at breaking them down and community building and breaking down the skills of that. I think I had a capacity for that kind of critical thought. I grew up in a pretty academic household, and that applied to understanding people has led me to a lot of skills around systems and interaction. But it's almost weird to say, because it's like, that's such a complex topic. Every time I think I've understood it, every time I think, I'm great at relating, like, I got this, I can talk with anybody, I like run into a new group, I'm like, shit. They've got a totally different language. What do I do? It's humbling.
Yes, absolutely. That's really interesting. The snippet you shared there about, as a child, reading so intensely all these books and been very, I want to say, isolated.
Oh, yeah.
Been introverted, but yet you now consider yourself as an extrovert.
I think I'm a highly sensitive extrovert. I'm kind of, I can get overwhelmed easily, and I also have like a lot of social anxiety. And I think for a lot of my life that made me feel like, well, I just work better alone. But I was still, I think, almost finding that connection through the world of books. It's just the people I connected with weren't real ones, they were written ones. And then once, and I also lived, we lived in the suburbs, and my parents like didn't have any friends, and like there wasn't a lot of opportunity for social interaction. It wasn't until I got to college really that I started realizing like interrelationship and interaction could be such a regular thing. And then I just kind of exploded into it. Like, I think one of the things I'm still working through now, and this is actually interesting to put the pieces together, is growing up reading those kind of ideal realities left me with a view of the world that was idealized. And the idea that kind of things worked out like stories where you could just fix suffering and it wouldn't come back and you could fix it for everyone. And there's been a gradual process of both like loving that I grew up with such innocence, but also trying to disentangle what is reality, what is real community, what are the constraints on it, what is, what sorts of suffering are good for people in a way. When do you hold people and when do you let them go? And I'm in a way grateful that I think a lot of the things other people learned through life experience when they were young, I've really had to learn very methodically and cognitively as I've grown older. It's put it more in my awareness instead of just being a reality of this is how life is. It's like, no, when I'm interacting with someone, I have to think about like, what communication style will I use? What tools? How are they speaking? How are they moving? What do I do in response? And there's actually a lot of choice and capacity that comes from it being a mental process.
Yeah. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot more work than we actually maybe even give ourselves credit for.
Oh my God, our brains are brilliant machines at it. The fact that we can even interact the ways we do is incredible. And there's something about like almost treating it like a puzzle to disentangle. Like, if we were friends, there'd be a long period of time where I'm noticing just like, what do you respond best to? Like, what environments do you work best in? Do we meet at like in real time, doing it like your house or at a coffee shop? What do we talk about? Like, what are the states you like being best in? And making those conversations as well, like asking you. It's like you get to build up this view of a person about basically how they best feel loved, both through noticing and through conversation. And I think it's just both fun and really delightful to have minds that can process all that information and retain it and learn and see everybody as distinct.
So powerful to be able to not only break it down the way you did, but to acknowledge that we are powerful beings. And we all have a choice in every single thing that we do, say, act, behave, and recognize there's an intention behind everything. Or we can put an intention behind it, whether we do it consciously or subconsciously. That again is your choice, right?
Yeah, and I think that's both on a moment-to-moment level and also on the systems that we create and the people around us. Because I'm always going to have, I'm always going to be playing out my patterns no matter how conscious I am. Like I'm personally always going to have mood swings, and when I'm within them, the world looks and feels different. Like what I thought was true a couple days ago will just, my mind will tell me, well, that's not true anymore. Like, you can't trust people in the same way, or, everything's terrible when a couple of days ago, everything was fine. And so it's like, I can have intentions that guide me, but I also try to set up my life to be surrounded by people who know these things about me and know when to reach out and know when to kind of just wrestle me and be like, no, not taking this.
Right. So it's equally as important for us to not only recognize and learn who we are as individuals of ourselves. And I think quarantine has really amplified that opportunity as a real blessing. But you're saying it's equally important for others to recognize who we are.
Yeah, I have a view on the self, and I think Authentic Life Course goes into this too, that like myself in a way doesn't just end at my body. Like I have like a personal context, a personal self, what happens inside here, thoughts, feelings, decisions, actions. But there's also like a social self. There's who I am around different people and who I surround myself with and how that affects me. And then there's also like an environmental context of what places do I choose to be in and how does that affect me? And it's kind of like a systemic self. And one of the things I've really learned over time and been exploring recently is the things that I can't easily change in myself. If I kind of work at them and crack at them year after year, and I don't make a lot of progress, I can kind of set my environment up to create the self that I want to be. An example is like I dropped communication with you a couple times over email, and I realized that like for the last couple years, I have the worst time keeping up with email. I'm good with face-to-face interaction, but I can't figure out how to do that over text. It's like, you know, I've got 10 people in my inbox. I don't just have 10 emails, and how do I want to relate with each of them? And it gets overwhelming.
Sure.
So
Sure.
Oftentimes I just drop emails for months on end. You know, I kind of had this wake up a couple months ago where I was like, well, that just doesn't seem to be changing about myself. No matter how much work I do on it, no matter how many strategies, I can't seem to live into my intention of being in integrity with the people that reach out to me. So instead of beating myself up, maybe I should see if there's a system I can create. And I actually went out and I hired someone to basically answer my emails and create a system with me for like what emails are important and how do we answer them and like, you know, what voices and what we actually did was like, he'll just put all of the emails that I get summarized into a Google Doc. It was almost debilitating me to always feel the person on the other side. Right. Because then I couldn't engage cognitively without engaging empathetically. Right. Using other people and using systems to make myself the person I want to be and help me live in integrity with that person. And that's the way I was finally able to set up a time with you.
That's right. That's right. Yes. And it's so interesting, and I find it so beautiful how you've been able to navigate around the areas that you feel are not working for you, but in the same token, create a solution that fits that for now as you evolve, because we grow and we learn and we evolve. So I want to commend you on that because it's not very easy, and I don't believe it's very productive maybe for many to be able to do that. It might feel easier for many to not just do it.
What's interesting is, just as I'm thinking about it now, this is probably like a vast kind of reduction in truth, but it's, you know, I feel like doing a lot of the practice I do, I stand at this intersection of business and personal growth work. I'm an entrepreneur. I've also been really interested in working with different types of groups. So I've come in contact with a lot of companies, but a lot of the work I do is in personal growth and internal transformation and community. The business world is really obsessed with systems and efficiency and creating the external conditions. And really not as a lot of focus on the internal, but if you think about it, we're trying to set people up to be the best machines they can in a business space. And then the personal growth world is really about the self and how do you set yourself up to thrive as much as possible. But it doesn't always focus very well on systems and efficiency because it's, you know, it's kind of about how do I tune into my intuition such that I make better decisions, and how do I like kind of meditate in on myself rather than how do I, you know, move into the right house that has the right room with the right quality of sunlight where I focus better when I'm there, which would be the more of the business sense. And I think there's a lot of value and beauty in both of them in terms of like really paying attention to my internal circumstances such that they tell me what my external circumstances should be, and paying attention to my external circumstances to see which ones work best to make me the kind of person that I want to be. Like what people help me thrive and in what environments, and, you know, what places am I not able to really change myself such that I need outside support. I think community is a lot of that. We give ourselves spaces in which we know we can be resourced, because being socially and personally resourced and surrounded by people that will help, you know, makes us as individuals better people. So that intersection of worlds yeah, that's been really, really instructive to me.
That's interesting. That's a really interesting perspective of how you have broken it out from that space of systematic to intuitive. My translation of that is perhaps if we create too many systems and structures, the intuitive self then becomes more disabled. You become less reliant on the intuitive self because we know that there are many experiences and lessons that show up in life often call for a different aspect of our intuitive space. If the same situation shows up again, it might call for a different intuitive response rather than it being pegged with the auto response created by a system.
I think a good analogy for that is family. Like if you have a partner and kids, there's a certain role that most people slip into playing where like it doesn't matter if you don't feel like taking the kids to play soccer on Sunday or something. If it doesn't feel right, you know, most people will still do it because that's the routine they've set up and that's the promises that they've made. So in those ways, systems can actually be debilitating. And I think it's actually where like personal choice and intuition really come online for me is like, what do you do in situations where you have a preset? Like, you know, do you set up a system where there's another way for your kids to get to the soccer field if you're not feeling it that morning, where you've got a carpool with other parents, or where you have a discussion with your kids around like, is this really what they want to do and what ideas do they have and how do they support you? And, you know, we just don't think about how to create options such that we can live the life that we most want to because our environment is calling us to be a certain way. I guess I'm more externally than internally oriented because my internal landscape is often so chaotic and my emotions and mind are often telling me things that just aren't true. And so I think I've focused a lot on, well, how do I set up, my systems and where I am and who I'm around, and to make myself the person I want to be, to make myself stable even when I don't feel like it.
And it's settling into those unsettled aspects of yourself, the uneasiness of being uncomfortable, but recognizing it, that it is uncomfortable and observing that, I think is, again, it's a courageous move. Not a lot of people do it. They just continue to be on autopilot or default, or feel that they have to complete this process of the 12 weeks of soccer and they can't break it at 6. What am I teaching my kids? That kind of situation. But in the same token, you're discounting your intuitive space. I call on this intuitive space so rapidly because I truly believe there's so much wisdom in that space. There's so much insight that we often discount, even just from a day-to-day situation, from our dialogue even. It was very intuitively led for me to reach out to you and have you on this podcast to be able to learn more about Sara and share her craft the way you do. Because I feel this systematic world that we've created and we live in is not serving our true self.
I'm curious if you find that following those sorts of intuitions lead you closer to what you perceive as your true self and towards like the kind of world that you want.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. It guides me on every single component of my life. And I'm not saying I don't plan. There's no structure in my life, because there is. But I can lean on my intuition for some of the more deeper decisions and direction that I'm looking for my life. And I lean on that, and it will always gear me in the right direction. It will always lead me in a path of my own truth, of my own expansion, of my own commitment to what it is I'm feeling I'm here to do. Just, I guess, in the same token you have through your lessons and learnings of reflection from a child to your, I want to say, institutional learning, and also to the organic learning that you have done and created all these environments and communities. I'm sure there's a huge amount of intuition that was guiding you and leading you on each single step along those ways. But yet creating that balance of what is the mental mind saying and how do we navigate that in this world.
It's cool to hear your view on it. I notice often I want to like play devil's advocate to things and like be like, but we can't follow intuition in all circumstances or when it comes to others. And it's like, actually, I think people just have different ways of following intuition. I think it's, for me, even though intuition is rarely a little voice from inside, I can tell when I'm not. If I correlate intuition with flow, I can tell when I'm not in it. It's like when I'm writing and all of a sudden the words start feeling really hard and the phrases just aren't coming to me. Mm-hmm. It's almost always better if I just kind of throw out whatever I've written and go back to the last place where I did feel flow, even if it's throwing out half an essay or half of a story.
Right.
Whenever I'm in that flow, my unconscious mind is really dominating, and it often knows a lot better than I do. I think that's, for me, really what intuition is it's communicating wisdom that my conscious mind can't necessarily process.
Absolutely.
And for me, it's often like, I'll know that I'm supposed to do something or that something's right or the conditions are right, oftentimes months or years before it happens. And it's incredibly frustrating. It's like, well, I've just got to wait for this to be time to do this thing. Like, I know it's going to come up. It's like the facilitation training I'm creating now. I started writing 4 years ago. I wrote it as part of the ALC. It was supposed to be, there was supposed to be a part 1 and a part 2 to that course. And this was going to be part 2. And then it never happened. I could never get the conditions right. I could never find the right way to do it. And I knew that when I hit on what felt like the right way, my whole body would say yes. And I would feel inspired and energized and just go do it. Yeah. But I kept, kind of poking at it. Like every once in a while I'd go back and I'd try to write more. I'd have a conversation about it. And it was like a spark that never caught.
Right.
And then when finally it caught, it's going to be, a 60 video, 2-part, 6-month long course that's, taking $10,000 just to do the initial filming of, and it's going to be completed in a month. Mm-hmm. So it's like, when it does catch, it's like, okay, well, now we've got a bonfire.
That's right. What a beautiful analogy of being in flow. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of trust to that. I guess I really have learned a lot from writing, where I can put myself down and sit at the paper or computer these days for hours and hours. And if I force myself at it, if it's not right, I end up writing, 10, 15 pages, but just having to throw it out the next day. Mm-hmm. Versus if I wait and if I find the right space to write in, and if I nourish my body, and then when I sit down, if I'm in flow, it won't feel like work at all. And what I'll do will be a lot better.
As human beings, we are so complex. Mm-hmm. We've already touched on the point of the mind is a powerful machine. Mm-hmm. The human body is equally as powerful. And when you tap that into and make the connection to all the other energetic worlds out there and realms out there, coupling everything together makes us really powerful human beings.
Yeah, powerful human beings and powerful like systems, the way we interact with others. And I think there's a lot of self that's beyond the self, where what we're picking up on is not just from our own bodies, but also from the outside. And I think it's one reason why I really like community. We can create these communal cells, these pods, that can become a lot more than we can alone, and can support each other and interweave in ways where we feel like better versions of ourselves and more intuitive. And it's really the interrelationship that allows us to thrive in that way. Because as individuals, like if I'm just alone, there's a lot of things I have to create in my life to just be solvent. And a lot of them aren't about following intuition. It's, I'm forced by circumstance to do a lot of things that don't feel right just to survive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just reminded of something I was listening to on a podcast. I think it was a podcast on homelessness once, which was like, homelessness isn't usually about like some huge thing happening and the person is homeless. It's usually about like one social support falling through, or like one factor changing, and then it's just a downward slide from there.
Right. But in the same token, every single opportunity, every single experience that we come across, I truly feel is a gift. As challenging as it may be in the physical form, in the mental space, in the emotional space, there's a great opportunity for growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, I think, relating to what you were saying earlier. We kind of have a choice about to what extent we stay awake in our lives, to what extent we are aware of our circumstances and questioning them and poking the sleeping bear of our minds into action.
So Sara, tell me, you've created this organization with lots of little tentacles that support and empower others in their journey of life. And yes, you are wise enough to recognize insights and visions from 4 years ago that are now coming into fruition. Other than the execution of that, what's next for Sara? What is it in your heart? What is it with your intention that you see maybe with the landscape of what's happening to the world? What's next?
With the world, I'm not sure, because in my view, what's happening is that all of us are having to deal with a trauma that we've never had to before. Like, I think there's actually a much more internal process happening that I don't know to what extent I can even help. Everybody is like suffering abuse at the same time. I've got to say, I don't actually necessarily think that's a bad thing. For all the pain and suffering it's causing, like, as a human organism, like that was kind of coming. Given what we've done to the environment, like I was expecting something like this in the next couple of years. And I don't think it's going to be the last one either. And a lot of the time, trauma actually makes us more resilient in some ways. So there's the one part that's just like, I've kind of gone inside and I'm just trying to figure out my own relationship to it. And how do I work with the instability and the fear and the, for me, like, I'm most grounded when I have a physical space and a home, and I don't have that right now. My partner and my housemate have different needs. So learning myself to be stable within uncertainty is part of, I think, where I'm headed. When quarantine first started, I did, I was kind of in a flurry of activity, and I created like, written manuals on how to create connection online, and did a ton of podcasts and like facilitated for tons of groups and helped put together a listening program for first line responders and all this sort of stuff. As kind of that initial flurry has subsided and we've kind of been trying to wrestle with, well, what is the world now? I haven't yet felt an intuition about what I'm supposed to do on a larger scale. And I've learned that rushing that is usually it doesn't always lead me to great places. So I think I'm taking care of my family, taking care of myself, creating the things that I feel drawn towards, trying to understand more about the system and structure of the world, donating to charities, understanding what are the best uses of money in that, and then trying not to stress myself out before whatever I'm supposed to do next becomes clear.
It's a powerful time for allowing to trust and allowing to be in flow while cultivating that internal dialogue and the relationships you have with others leads us to expand and grow on so many more levels than maybe even having to produce an actual outcome. But it puts us in a space of expansion. And I think that's what we're here for. Sara, this has been such a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it. I honor your time, and I'm grateful.
Thank you for the interview.
I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.